engage with different audiences, helping others improve their presentation, data presentation, and aligning with stakeholders early on to maximize the impact and ROI for the conversation. So, this is a really great time to tag a friend or your colleague who wants to improve their data communication skills. For those of you who are new, my name is Henna, and I'm the host of the Art of Communicating Data podcast, which is what you're listening to right now. I go live to record these interviews. So if you want to be notified about future interviews, make sure you click follow on my LinkedIn profile, and you can click on the bell icon to get notified every time I go live for these interviews. Now I want to welcome our guest, Karan Ambasht. He is a lead marketing analyst at Highmark Health, a featured mentor in the data community, and a skilled coach in helping others present data with clarity and confidence. I'm really excited to have him here on the show today because he's been working in the field for over a decade, and I'm sure he has valuable insights to share with us today. So, welcome.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me, Anna. And it's really great. I've been following your profile for some time. I'm glad I reached out and we are having this conversation. So looking forward to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
likewise. I've noticed you in the DataFam community, so it's really nice to finally talk in person or virtually, face to
Yeah.
face, so to speak. And when we were discussing about potential topics to talk about today, one thing you mentioned was you like to help your peers with presenting data, and I'm curious what got you
Mhm.
interested in doing this in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the things which anybody who is working with analytics has struggled through, including me, and I still do, is how much of that data you need to present, right? That's a question that everybody faces through. So I think early on, when I started facing this, I got a lot of help from mentors, and I learned a lot from, for example, the LinkedIn community. A lot of people shared their thoughts. So when I started doing that with younger grads or people who are new to my team, definitely generated a lot of interest, and I started doing that more with the larger groups within my organization, and sometimes with LinkedIn also. So I think it has been a great journey, and it's always a two-way street where I get to learn a lot more so often from people who are looking at it from a different perspective. So
Yeah, no, that's really
yeah.
great, and you brought up a really good point about how it's something a lot of us struggle with in this
Mm.
space. But I think it's good to point out that we don't get usually this formal training in honing the skill, and so I think I really like to start these conversations by, for those who are listening who are not sure if this is a skill worth honing, if maybe you can share any specific instance where either you or you saw someone effectively communicate data and you saw it actually influence leadership or influence or make an impact with their work,
Yeah.
and if you can tell us what made that communication successful.
Sure. I can give two examples. First one would be from my experience. Most of the dashboards that I have worked on in my at my full-time job and in my experience, I think if I can select like top three of those dashboards which have been used a lot, most of it have been through like bar charts and text tables and things like that. And that's what continues to amaze me is that the simplicity, what we consider as a very simple line chart or a bar chart, is making life so much easier for a lot of people. So
Mm.
you kind of also, gain a lot of new audience when you are keeping it simple. And it's hard to do that, especially when you have been in and out of those dashboards, trying out different visuals uh, for presenting the data. So I think that's one of my experiences that I've learned is that always keep it simple, and having that feedback loop with the stakeholders is very, very important. Where if they want to add additional visuals, I try to work with them and build on top of that. I think one of the other examples where I have coached, quote unquote, coached or mentored other people who are just starting out. For example, I work a lot with Tableau. When they are starting out with the tool, I try to give them the feedback as well as the reason behind it. So I try to give them some examples or introduce them to Tableau Public. Tableau Public is essentially like, I mean, there can be a lot. lot of complex visualizations there, but I try to talk with them about what's the pros and cons of it, right? People who are possibly competing for example, Iron Viz or things like that. It takes time to build that, and in a official setting where you have a lot of, let's say, senior management trying to work through, decision making, it's much more important to then look at the simplest visual of all, I think, and go from there. So that has been my experience, and I think, yeah, that has definitely led to a lot more people utilizing the dashboard.
Right. Dustin, who is listening to this conversation and a friend of ours, he says presenting data effectively can have such a big impact on individual careers and also on the company. That's a really great point because I know my question was
Mhm.
phrased about the impact on the company, on the business, or on the project, but it's also so important for your own personal career growth and getting the recognition you deserve as well within your team, your organization, or your company. It can be a really helpful skill, being able to communicate that. Have you noticed that with that impact with the people you have been able to help out, that it actually helped their career?
Definitely. Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Dustin is saying. And hi, Dustin. I know we have been in touch on LinkedIn sometimes. So I think it definitely helps a lot because if we look at individual careers, again, I think when stakeholders who are not that technical, right? They when they understand that you are ready to bridge that gap between, you know, being too technical versus understanding why they want to take a decision early on rather than, doing a back and forth with you, it sort of um, increases your impact, right? So you are then being talked about in some other reports. Then in other rooms where you are not there, people are suggesting that let's reach out to this person because they understand what we can take away from a dashboard or a report. So I think it definitely impacts a lot, and you become an asset for that group or even that domain. When you start developing more and more, you start becoming a much more important asset for that group. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. If by the way, if anyone listening has any questions or comments, feel free to put it in the chat box, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. The next thing I wanted to ask you is, we've been talking about the benefits of presenting and how you've been working with your peers and colleagues to help them become better presenters. From that experience, what are some of the most common challenges you've seen when you have been coaching others in presenting data?
Yeah, I think the top most reason I have seen is that people spend so much time developing these, complex calculations or reporting. It becomes very normal for us. It
Mhm.
becomes that view becomes much easier for us to digest through, and we want to make sure there is a need for within us to make sure that we also tell people that we have done this tremendous
Right.
work. We have spent a lot of time doing this complex calculation, and believe me, I mean, even right now, when I'm doing a lot of this work, there is that temptation of
Mhm.
doing, showing much more on the report itself. And I think with time, that's the part that I've learned is that start off with much more simplicity. And if there is a need, we definitely being open to adding on top of this is a great point. But I think that's the trap that every analyst every now and then goes through and then has to kind of roll back a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're not just for this need to tell people, like, look at this like solution I've created, at this technical problem I solved. It's a big accomplishment, but I think sometimes I notice we might do it to when we're especially when we're presenting to either leadership or to an audience that doesn't know us. Like, this is a way for us to get some credibility. Like, we know
Yeah.
what we're doing. You hired a smart person for this job,
Yeah.
who's able to speak a language that you cannot understand. That's why you're paying me the big bucks.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's where
Yeah.
the need comes from. But it can make it hard for you to get across your main message to your audience members if that's not if they're not familiar with, or they have difficulty understanding those technical parts. But yeah, that's
Very
a lot
true. Yeah.
challenge that a lot of us can relate to. Um, can you maybe share a transformation story either you went through or you saw others go through,
Mhm.
that where they were significantly improving their data presentation skills?
Sure. Yeah, I can share some of my experiences. Again, I think in one of my recent reporting where the use case was on decision making, and then the first pointer was mostly on comparisons across years. So the idea was to have those comparisons done between, for example, March 2022, March 2023, and 2024. So one of the first things that I started doing was plotting these line charts over time, having years on the x-axis essentially and the months. So what made it easier for the audience in that view was they could see the entire 3 years of data in a single view, which I was very proud of because I knew that would give them the averages. There was a distinction between the years, so I had a lot of these things set up. But what happened gradually was that I could see a lot of questions coming up, right? They wanted to know if there was a difference, what was that difference, or if there was a percentage that we can get on there to say, there was an X percentage of increase in March 2024 as compared to the last year. So what happened as a result of that, that report went through a lot of different versions and metamorphosis over time, where I could see different reactions to these reporting every time I presented it. And the senior management in that discussion with me would raise some questions, and then the harder part was to get to that part where they wouldn't directly mention that we are having a hard time trying
Mm,
to get that right. So that's the part which is also, I think, lot of a learning opportunity early on, is that you need to ask more questions.
mm,
Otherwise, people have so many other decisions to make, especially with senior management. There's so many things going on at the same time. Not everybody would reach out to you with a specific ask or a change. So what I did was I started playing with, playing involved with different versions of that, and eventually I think that's where we hit the right spot, was having, I would say, a stacked line chart in that sense, where it was clearly visible for if somebody was looking at, say, Q3 of this year, they could clearly see these months coming up for the last year. So we had all the 12 months on the x-axis, and the year line chart would go across. I think that it sounds simple, but it took me a lot of time to understand what people are looking for, because this was
mm,
one of the earliest reporting that we started. And having compared that data through, I think it's very, very easy. People like to take the snapshots, which I know a lot of people have different opinions about whether dashboards should be used to export to Excel or snapshots. But that's how things are, right? Like if
mm.
something is being presented in a deck, snapshots are going to be there. So I try my best to be at a place where I can have a middle ground, and people can take the snapshots as needed. So I think that that was a good example of that learning. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, you brought up how with this particular dashboard that you had several iterations with, this you're presenting to different audiences, and this the same thing was presented multiple times. I'm curious how you go about adapting your data presentation, your visuals, even when presenting to different levels of leadership, or even
Yeah.
just different audiences, like technical folks to non-technical folks.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the principles that I've started implementing a lot more, especially over the last year, is I kind of flip the script on to the traditional way of presenting, where we have the build-ups in the initial slides, and then we gradually get to the results, or there are, different I would say intervals of getting, like it gets to a point where it's a um, revelation, and then you build up another story point, and so on. So instead of doing that, I read it somewhere where you can try having all of your key takeaways on your first slide, right?
Mhm.
So you have given them what they're looking for, and everything after that is a drill down of it. So the onus is on me to kind of have their attention towards the other half of the conversations. And if not, a lot of times I think with especially with senior management, the discussion moves away from the report. They have
Mhm.
seen the takeaways, they have seen a snapshot, they have seen the report. Now the discussion starts off on, okay, what will we do now, right? And that's the part where I don't need to be the quote unquote hero of that engagement and the discussion. The hero is the data and the decision eventually that will come out of it. So I take a back seat and try to understand the business. I try to understand the stakeholders where they're coming from. And I think that's the biggest change that I've done. I've seen it being successful more than once because people reach out to me after the discussion saying that this was really useful. We got what we wanted in the first 5 minutes. So we respected their time, and had an impact with that discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when we're communicating to very busy folks, like people in leadership, having that front loaded at the beginning, those key
Yeah.
takeaways, emphasizing what your call to action is to them. What recommendations do you have to them? Even if you have to repeat it at the beginning again at the end, it makes it very clear what you're expecting from them as well as they're consuming this presentation.
Mm.
Um, you know, uh, I noticed many data professionals. We've touched upon this before too about how they have trouble figuring out when their presentation could be too technical, maybe too much information, too much content. Do you
Mhm.
have like a framework or strategy that you use to help? With yourself and other peers that you coach to to prepare for a presentation that they're working on that may be data heavy or there's a lot of things to share and they need to
Yeah.
figure out
Yeah.
how to fit that in.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And this was something that I posted about, was on a teaser trailer and movie strategy.
Mm,
So you have, in terms of the time taken, right? The teasers are usually short term, then you get a bit more with the trailer, and then you get to the movie. So, and that's why the key takeaways part that I mentioned, I think it's always better to have lesser things, much more precise starting out and then go from there if there are interests. So if I have presented four key takeaways, one of them might stand out, and that's probably something that I might not be aware of because
mm,
I'm not in the day-to-day discussions with the stakeholders. If that stands out, the third pointer out of those four pointers, for example, will lead to our next conversation, which will be a trailer. Now, if we get to a discussion where people want to know more about, it's always better to have those in the appendix sections, or
mm,
maybe people reach out to you one on one. So I always consider this to be a great template. Even if we have a technical audience, I would still suggest having these very specific short-term takeaways upfront so that everybody knows what we are going through, and then people are not waiting for you for the big reveal.
mm.
So yeah, that's my suggestion.
Awesome. This has been really interesting to see, especially I know that from your answers, I can tell your presentations, a lot of it is you're presenting, it sounds like data visuals, dashboards. When you are like, I'm curious if you've noticed if you've had to present something that may not be, the output is not a dashboard or data visual, how have you
Mhm.
adjusted your presentation when it comes to those kind of presentations versus when you are demoing a dashboard?
Yeah, I mean, so in those cases where I'm assuming if you are saying, for example, if it is text heavy in that sense, right? So if there are less visuals or if it is not about a report specifically, I try to keep it very text light. And I think one of the other portions where you can try doing this, a lot of people, and I've tried this too, is you can ask a platform like ChatGPT to critique your report, or if you are presenting a slide, you can also ask some of these platforms to critique your report. And I found it useful because sometimes, again, the spiral that we are always in kind of narrows our focus. And then you get essentially a second set of eyes looking at it. So if it is not a lot of visuals or a reporting, I try to keep it short. And it's better for people to say, I want more, rather than saying, oh my God, when is this presentation ending? So that's always something that I keep as a, a thumb rule on my end.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a really good point about leaving people with that feeling of wanting to hear more from you or to engage with you more, whether it's reaching out to you separately or requesting
Mhm.
maybe another meeting or another presentation, rather than having
Yeah.
having someone wish that this meeting is going way too long and should end soon. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think another part, at least from the presenters side of things, the portion that most presenters don't look forward to in the presentation, is the Q&A section. I think part of it is like, we can't prepare for it as well. We can't, it's a lot of it is out of our control in terms of who will ask and what question will they
Mhm.
ask. Do you have any techniques that you use or that you recommend for handling challenging questions that may come up?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's very, very important for us to be transparent about what we don't know. And again, I think when we are in a position where if we are a senior analyst or a lead analyst, it becomes much more difficult for us to say, well, I'm not aware of this, but let me take a note about it, right?
Mhm.
And make sure that we do circle back. So I am a really, really extensive note taker, and I have understood that I'm not going to remember it a day from now, as much as I would like to believe. But that's the part where I think when people understand that, yes, in the last three meetings, Karan has reached out to me. They
Mhm.
understand the first time that they are asking something, I will get to an answer, whether it might not be something that we like right now,
Mhm.
but we do have an awareness of what's happening. So that's the part which, one of the things that we discussed, I think, in our conversation was, people who are worried about these questions coming up or being too nervous before a presentation. I always think about this as being a messenger and not something that would question my own credibility. So I'm always in there with them, fighting for the bigger truth, asking for the answers on, how do we get this? Who do we reach out to? So looking at it that way makes it much more easier for me. I calm down and I'm like, well, there will be questions about it. Let's just note everything down and have a
Mhm.
proper follow-up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great approach. Not putting this expectation on yourself that you need to know all the answers, and being okay with not knowing and telling people that you don't know, rather than trying to make up something on the spot. Especially as data professionals, if we make up something or have some assumptions about the data or the insights from it,
Yeah.
and then later on we have to backtrack and say, actually, we were wrong. That actually looks worse than saying,
Yeah.
I don't know. I will. But great question. I will follow up and actually delivering on that follow up, even if it's
Yeah.
not the news that they were looking for. Even if it's bad news, it's better than being inaccurate.
Yeah, and assumptions are especially one of the things I would like to add is that's one of the earliest slides that I always include. In fact, before
Yeah.
the
Hmm.
takeaways, the assumptions are really, really important because then we are going into a section where people are having their own assumptions in their mind. So that's even more dangerous. So yeah.
Yeah. Another thing that we brought up in our potential topics to talk about was aligning with stakeholders so that we can maximize the ROI and impact with these conversations
Mhm.
that we do have with them. And I'm curious about, about a scenario where, let's say, if, you know, in let's say if you're having like multiple meetings with these stakeholders, and at the beginning you notice that there is a misalignment with stakeholders. I know the approach some people may take is that it's okay, we're just gonna go business as usual, and just
Mhm.
hope that we align by chance along the way.
Yeah.
Eventually it'll click for them. So just letting nature take its course, I guess, that's one
Mhm.
approach, versus really trying to spend a lot of time, even if it means delaying the start of a project or delaying the implementation of a recommendation that you're making, but really taking that time to align. Like, how important do you think that is? Like, what would your advice be in terms of their approach to take with this?
Sure, and that's a great question. I think if there are misalignments, I would say there are. I would consider these into two different sections where starting out, if there is a major misalignment, I would then utilize some of that time to understand where that misalignment was so
Mm,
that it saves us some time with the next discussion that's happening. Um, and utilizing that time because everybody's already there. So it would be hard, especially again, if there is senior management involved, it would be hard to get that time with them. In If there is a minor misalignment, I would still want to utilize that time, but I always check with the, let's say if there is a primary stakeholder involved, I always check with them. You know, do you think there is value in continuing with these conversations? I add this on my end saying that I have two questions on my end that I
mm,
think will help us. I ask those two questions based on a yes or no. If not, give them the 25 minutes back and then circle back with my team. I think giving that time back is much more important for me
mm,
in that priority. But of course, I would want to make sure that I have all my answers on my end so that I'm not again, scrambling through with that emails or IM with them. So that would definitely be a higher priority for me to have all the questions answered and then say, do we want this time back? So
mhm.
yeah.
Okay, this is good to know. Nicholas, who's watching, is saying good evening. Good evening to you as well. And I'm just making sure I don't miss any questions from our LinkedIn page. Hopefully, it's bringing that all in. I do have another question about, let's say, there's folks on here who may have been presenting for years. They're not new to this. What's like a lesser known tip or like an advanced technique you'd suggest that they do to improve their presentations?
Um, so I think I would say, especially with people who have been presenting for a while, the only thing I can think of is the piece where I mentioned that utilizing a platform like ChatGPT. And the reason I mentioned that is because it's more recent. I don't think a lot of people might be utilizing it, but I have found it to be a good, um, you know, uh, conversationalist in that sense, where I can ask that. And I can also do a lot of you know user stories in that sense. So you can give a prompt saying that, okay, you are, quote unquote, you are a senior manager in the finance analytics in a healthcare organization. This is my report. What would be your key takeaways, or what would you want to see as a visual from this report? Things like that. So I really like the way that you can build on top of this, and it sort of becomes a persona for you to talk through.
Mhm.
And of course, we used to do this before generative AI was there, but we used to have, we need to find people to do that. And
Right.
including me, I'm not very comfortable doing that with people who might not have enough time or they might not be
Mhm.
even aware of it. So you don't always have people around, but definitely if you can do it with one of your teammates or somebody else who is a stakeholder in that process. But for a lot of introverts, I would say when we won't
Y
want to pick, reach out to people, there's a good way of bridging that gap in between. Yeah.
yeah, and with their advanced voice mode, it really feels like a true conversation you're having with someone.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
haven't even tried that, but I do think that that would be a great way of doing that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I use AI so much now, both professionally, wherever I can, because the kind of data I
Yeah.
work with, but also personally. It's just I use it almost all the time. Even for like over the weekend, we were going to a charity event, and my husband is having a hard time picking out which suit will match well with themes. And I was like, I'm not good at this. Let's just ask ChatGPT, and it like figured it out for us. So it's a great pro tip, and I think also for when
Yeah.
it comes to data presentations, one thing I recommend for those who I notice struggle with adapting their presentations for specific audience. And what we talked about earlier, how sometimes we know something so well, like the technical parts of
Yeah.
things, or like we know the details of it. It's really hard for us to put ourselves in our audience's shoes and figure out what's too much information, what's the right amount. And I like to plug that into ChatGPT and say, like, this is the audience I'm presenting to now. This is the
Mm.
contents of my presentation. How do you recommend I just or pivot based on like this presentation that I gave to a totally different audience. One needs adjusting, and it really helps with getting that started. And even like small communications that I may do with executives, even if it's just like a short email I'm sending, it really corrects me. I've already fed it
Yeah.
requirements in the past, like this is how the email should always be, and I'm like, I'm ready to send this email, and ChatGPT is like, no, wait, remember we said not to do this.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I think it's better than just
Yeah.
talking to a colleague because you've already fed it all this information and it remembers.
Yeah, yeah, that's even better. And that's a great point. If there is a part where it can, quote unquote, remember things and you have a template of that response, it's even much more, even better to have that conversation.
Yeah, well, this has been a really helpful and insightful conversation. And to end things with, do you have any general like top three tips? Doesn't have to be three for someone who is preparing maybe their first major data presentation.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think it's keeping it simple is probably the best thing that you can do. We all have our a voice in our head telling us that we should expand more. Just hold on to that idea, have everything in appendix, and then start building up a simpler view of that presentation. I think that's probably the suggestion that I would have. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And for those who are interested in maybe connecting with you, because I know you're active on LinkedIn, you mentioned about posting about some of these topics. Where can they reach you and connect with you?
Yeah, yeah, LinkedIn would be the best platform. I do like interacting with a lot of data folks there, so reach out to me on LinkedIn. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I've been noticing a lot more of the DataFam community moving from Twitter or X now to LinkedIn, which is great because I
Hmm.
was never really active on that platform. So it's been great to see more DataFam people on LinkedIn now. I'll definitely link your LinkedIn in the show notes for those who are listening to this on the podcast. And for those who are watching LinkedIn, you should be able to see Karan's profile. Make sure you connect with him there. Thank you, Karan, for coming. I know it's evening time for you, so I appreciate you taking this time to speak with us today. And thank you for those who watched live to this episode of the Art of Communicating Data show. If you want to be notified of future interviews, live interviews that I do with amazing guests like Karan, make sure you follow my profile and you can click the bell notification to be notified. We're going to have a few more this month, so I'm excited to do that. And yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Karan, for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, then. Bye, everyone.